Everyone. I'm going to do number 28, journal 28. The topic's clean fantasy. That's also the title, is clean fantasy. And I have so many more thoughts than I put into this one little page. So the rest that have been sort of loitering for almost a year, I will release. This will be my platform to talk about those. So stay tuned. And at the end, I have some more um, sort of sentences on the subject. Number 28, Tuesday, June 21st, 2022, clean fantasy. Hi, everyone. In my last journal, I included a link to a long email exchange between Fred and me. In it, I characterized Mr. Rogers in a way that hinted at figurative sexual prowess. Subsequently and immediately, I was asked whether my books are clean, like JRRT, or grimy, like GRRM. Answer, they're sterile enough to be used as a milk glass. Can a 10-year-old drink from it? Sure, it's not dirty enough to threaten his or her immune system. I mean, there are several heavy themes: death, illness, depression, corruption, but swords aren't penetrating flesh on every page. A Song of Ice and Fire, i.e. Game of Thrones, was brilliant, wildly successful, wildly lucrative. And just like every other lucrative sensation, throngs of imitators will try to secure a piece of the lucrat for themselves. In this case, they began flooding the fantasy pool with smutty storytelling, assuming it was the smut that made it popular. In the post-Game of Thrones era, every new book or show I begin is ridiculously raunchy, and I roll my eyes because it wasn't the sex and stabbing that made their prototype so successful. In the 90s, countless men claimed to read Playboy for the articles, and I distrusted those claims. But that really is what makes A Song of Ice and Fire special. Half the pages may be bedizened with erotica, but underneath the courtesan garb is real character development, elegant plot structures, and most of all, beautiful sentences. That's what made it work. Unfortunately, the cultural emphasis was fixated on the centerfold, and I think that misdirection of focus did great harm to the genre. Today, I commonly hear people criticize clean fantasy as lacking sophistication, as though porn, if you twist the dial just right, broadcasts a signal of refinement, as opposed to simply being basal and unnecessary. We all know what intercourse is. There's no revelation in its exhibition. There isn't even important dialogue. It's just a bunch of guttural noises. I wouldn't call that literary maturity. It's not like dairy, where if spoiled milk gets raunchy enough, it becomes cheese, and the raunchier the cheese, the fancier it is. Debauchery is not fancy in that way, and lecherous themes do not automatically make a book mature. Maturity comes from quality of prose, structure, and storytelling. It comes from compelling character development, originality of ideas, insights into the human experience. These are what matter. And sex, blood, and cussing don't help the writer achieve any of that. They're just lazy ways to broadcast, I'm writing for mature audiences. I would equate it to watching a vulgar comedian. Cussing isn't actually funny. All it does is energize the delivery. Profanity functions like an exclamation point, but it can be embedded anywhere in the sentence. And to me, loud punctuation is a sign of weakness. It means the sentences cannot capture my attention on their own, so they are adorned with crass jewelry, hoping to seduce me into laughter. But why wouldn't you want to go all out? Pull all the stops. Reading disinfected literature is like watching Usain Bolt jog. I don't want to watch that. I want to see full speed, full gore, full frontal. I disagree. To me, the most emotional musical performance is a heavy band doing an acoustic set. They could easily turn up the amp, distort the guitar, and scream, but they don't. They withhold. They attempt to capture a subtler, much more elusive, and far more powerful emotion. It's not Bolt jogging, it's Bolt dancing. Gore and sexy gore and gory sex are just gimmicks, cries for attention. Alternatively, if we impose limitations, we're forced to develop the fundamentals in meaningful ways. Limitation is the foundation of art, I think, but it's a topic for another journal. Okay, so the additional thoughts I have on this, there's romance, right? That's one thing. There's like romance as a genre. And then there's like porny sex as a genre. And one of these is incredibly easy to write. The other one is nearly impossible. It's been done, but barely ever. Romance, though, this is so easy because the reality, we spend our lives romanticizing boring facts. That to be human, that's what we do. So we're so practiced at this. Any amendment to the facts of courtship is an improvement on it. I mean, this is where we're like world class as a species at romanticizing things. But that doesn't mean romance is a genre that I can bear to read because of the like central theme, which is sex. They just make it all about sex, and that's almost always corny. Uh, Even the worst ones are like when people, no, this one's artistic. You don't want like the only thing worse than like artistic porn is okay, like sex or whatever. Is when people tell me it's tasteful, and then they expect me to read it or watch it. I'm like, no, this is really tasteful. Those are the worst ever. Like those, we should have a book burning of that. They're so embarrassing, all of them. My wife and I, before we were married, we took this trip up to Oregon, and we got Guy Gavriel K on Audible, and we were listening to it on the way up, and he kept using the word portal in a graphic way as like a feature of the anatomy, the portal. And like every time we heard it, we would look at each other and say, ew. I mean, that's like such an ew. Like it's just always done so badly. My wife, I was just talking about, I was just telling the story of our Oregon trip and Guy Gavriel K, the portal. But like the only instance in which I think a sex scene was handled really well is Salman Rushdie. Moore's Last Sign. Salman Rushdie in Journal 46, I think it was, 40 something. I talk about fantasy being a disrespected or respected genre, and Salman Rushdie is one of the authors I would put in there. One of his novels, Satanic Verses, is like these two Indian actors. They're on this like jumbo jet, and it gets hijacked and like demolished, and by magical miracle, they not only survive, like one of them becomes the devil and the other becomes this like haloed angel. And fantasy, right? Salman Rushdie I would include into this fantasy genre. But Moore's Last Sigh, this one has the only sex scene I've ever read that belongs, right? That is more than like intercourse happened, because that's usually what people should say. Intercourse happened, and then you just move on. But he uses ellipses as censorship and as a way of hustling along the narrative. So, and he ... and she ... and they ... and then ... and it sort of goes on like this, through the highs and lows, and second highs and second lows, and there's actual plot, there's character development, these two sincere efforts fumbling through, and it's like perfect, and it works, and no verbs are used, at least as far as I remember. There wasn't like one noun of relevance or verb of any kind, and it totally worked, right? But in fantasy, especially in the post George R.R. Martin era, but there's a tendency to over describe. It's not just sex scenes. You're a knight, right? You're like a soldier on the front line, and the battle ends, and you put your like sword in its sheath. Okay, that's all that needs to be said. But I don't need 4 pages of exposition on like the interplay between sword and scabbard. I don't need to read like the temperature. It was hot and the hand was sweaty. It's cold, and with a shivering hand, the sword, approaches the scabbard. I don't need textures of leather. I don't need smells and colors. Just, oh, you put the sword away. Good, done, move on. But in the like literature, it's painful for me, these scenes. always painful. And the sex scenes I'm talking about. In shows, it's not as bad, in movies and TV shows and stuff, because I get up and I leave the room when they begin. You can always tell when these things are beginning. But this is, I just like, does anybody need anything? That sentence has been said more times, probably during Game of Thrones, than the rest of my life combined, because that's when I go to the kitchen and I make some tea. And then when I return, did I miss anything? That's the question I ask. And 100% of the time, the answer is no, it was just a sex scene. Never, ever, ever has it been. Actually, yeah, I mean, it was weird. At the middle, right, there was this plot twist, and, they were just like sighing and breathing and grunting. And then this turn of events, they killed the dragon. Right, they rescued the prisoners. They reclaimed the throne. I mean, you got to see this. I got to. Never has that happened. So these sex scenes are just a distraction from the story, from where the character development, from the plot, from everything. It just detracts from anything meaningful. So certainly in my book, there's none of this stuff. That's what I mean by why it could be like used as a milk glass. There are heavy themes, but there's none of that like creepy 4 pages about sword and scabbard stuff. Okay, I will end there. I hope in your life, your sex scenes and romance are both fulfilling in an appropriate way. And bye, everybody. I will see you again soon.